Welcome to Rural Remix, your source for deeper, richer stories about life in rural places. Aliens. They come in peace, they destroy our planet, they mystify, terrify, and inspire. This series explores alien movies through the decades, specifically those set in rural places. Welcome to Crop Circle Cinema. Why do movie aliens so often land in what many consider to be flyover country? What do rural alien invasions say about societal fears, technological change, and our relationship to the land? We're taking a deep dive into the symbolism and significance of the alien genre in rural America.
I'm Anya Petrenslepian.
And I'm Susanna Brown. In today's episode, we're exploring the paranoia embedded in rural alien movies. What do aliens reveal about our anxieties around the government, neighbors, strangers, and friends? Who do we believe? And who can we never trust? Be warned, we'll be discussing these movies without avoiding spoilers. Welcome to Crop Circle Cinema. Hi, Anya. It's great to be back on the podcast with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, sitting in my closet, new apartment, new recording space, and twisted up like a pretzel down here.
Perfect. Sounds ideal and comfortable.
And you're also somewhere new.
Yes, I am now reporting live, not that live, from a new country. I am currently in Amsterdam getting my master's degree. So, in a different country and gaining new education. Very exciting.
More media education.
Yes. We'll see if I sound any smarter on this time around of the podcast. I doubt it, but we'll find out. So, we're back again talking about movies again, which is super exciting. But we are talking about a different genre of movie than the last time. Last time we were talking about horror movies. Check out the Rural Horror Picture Show on the Rural Remix podcast feed. But this time we're going to be talking about alien movies, specifically rural alien movies mainly. And just to get us started before we dive into our topic of the day, I have to know, do you believe in aliens, Anya?
The short answer to this question is yes. I think it's more complicated than just a simple yes, but basically, I think that the universe is infinite. I think that everything is a game of chance, and as a result, there's got to be other life somewhere in the infinite universe that we can't even fathom.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many times whether I'm trying to calm myself down or I guess also freak myself out that I remind myself that we are so very small in a vast universe. And so logically, I'm like, there is something else out there. I just think I have so many questions about what that is. But there has to be, right? I don't know. There just must be.
I personally take comfort in the idea that the universe is cold, enormous, and random. I also find it entertaining to imagine what other life is out there and what it could look like. And I'm not talking about amoebas. I mean, sorry to the amoebas, but I believe the intelligent life. And I really read a lot of science fiction. And the books and series that I like the most are the ones that are really imaginative when it comes to not only what other life is there, but what do other societies look like and how do those societies interact with each other? And I could go on about those, but we're not talking about books. We're talking about movies. And we're also not just talking about any old alien movies. We're talking about alien movies where the aliens come to Earth.
Very true.
We had to narrow it down some. So no Star Wars for us.
No Star Wars for us, and unfortunately, no Alien, as in the movie Alien. The movies that stay in space, we're seeing what happens when the aliens, like you said, come to hang out on Earth for mixed intentions, mixed reasons, but we'll get into all of that.
Yes.
So yeah, we're going to talk about alien movies, but can you explain how we came to the decision that rural alien movies would be the next genre that we tackle?
Alien movies and horror movies have a good amount in common. And I think what makes them so interesting to talk about is that because they have these fantastical elements and they can depart in any way that they choose from the bounds of realistic storytelling, they become really interesting avenues for commentary. They are reflections of society, but not society as it is in a literal sense, but maybe society as it is in a deeper sense. And that makes it, I think, really exciting to talk about. And of course, both of these genres, as we know, have a lot to say about rural people and places. But one thing that we find really interesting, which we're going to talk about a lot also, is that they treat rural people and places pretty differently, even though the two genres have a lot in common. A lot of these movies are set in rural places, I'd say probably disproportionately so. And some of that, may just have to do with plot development. There are features of rural places that lend themselves well to sort of spooky and mysterious goings on.
There's one movie that I think we'll definitely be talking about more later in the episode that had a really great line related to that plot component you're mentioning, where they're discussing varied strategies for alien invasions.
Why here? Why Ohio? If you were going to take over the world, would you blow up the White House Independence Day style? Or sneak in through the back door?
So in some sense, it might just make sense if you're an alien, like, yeah, let's land in that cornfield. That's going to be a better place than, Manhattan, depending on what your goals are and what your approach is, right? And of course, another feature of this too could be that there, as far as real world alien encounters go, which is something we're going to talk about much later in the series, a lot of those really famous events do also take place in rural places. I'm thinking Roswell, New Mexico. I'm thinking Area 51. Like these are remote. Area 51 is super remote. Roswell is a rural community. So there's that element of it too. And then I'd say the last and sort of maybe main point about why these movies are so interesting to talk about is that alien movies aren't about aliens. Monster movies aren't about monsters. Like when we have aliens, when we have monsters, there's not really the focus, right? These movies are really about ourselves. They're about us. They're about humans. They're about society. And sort of aliens and monsters are the vehicle with which we get to sort of play with that reality and reflect on those things.
We love a metaphor.
Love a metaphor, exactly. They then become these vehicles to talk about whatever it is that we're worried about, whether that is the government or religion or communism versus capitalism or environmentalism or colonialism, individuality, like whatever it is that is concerning us, these aliens become, like you said, a metaphor for how to talk about this stuff. So all of that makes it pretty interesting fodder for a podcast, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that we'll cover is alien movies have been being made for a long time and they've looked really different in many ways throughout their history of being made, but they have this common theme that you mentioned of revealing something about society. And often it's revealing something that society is nervous about, afraid of, or maybe what a common enemy is viewed to be at that moment. And that's something we want to focus on for this first episode.
So today we are starting off with a theme that was really common across a lot of the movies that we watched, and that is a theme of paranoia, conspiracy, and the fear and suspicion we have about aliens, about the government, about each other, and how those things manifest in the genre.
Exciting. Just to start us off on that topic, how long has this alien business, this alien fear, conversation, discovery, speculation, how long has it all been going on?
Yeah, this is something that I think is absolutely fascinating, is that, at least in Western European thought, the idea that there is other life not on this planet goes back to the 5th century BCE, at least.
Whoa.
There was this school of philosophers, they're called the atomists. This predates Socrates. Like a lot of ancient Greek thought, it sort of, took a little nap during the Middle Ages, and then reappeared flamboyantly during the Renaissance. And so there's a letter where the German astronomer Johannes Kepler is speculating to Galileo if there's life on Jupiter.
Huh.
There were Christian theologians that were trying to decide, the very complicated question of if there is life on other planets, would Jesus Christ have to sacrifice himself
Hmm.
for those planets too?
Oh, that complicates things.
Or had he covered everybody by sacrificing himself on Earth? I mean, there's like so there's a lot of thought and discussion that's sort of based around the idea of if there's other life in the universe. And it's not a new idea, it's a very old idea. But I think what's so interesting now is the degree to which this idea of aliens has taken on a form of modern day folklore
Hmm.
and how it manifests itself, especially in the second half of the 20th century.
Yeah, it sounds like people have been, like we said before, either to calm themselves down or to freak themselves out further, been speculating about the vastness of the universe since, honestly, the beginning of theorizing generally. So it's really interesting to think about how long it's been going on.
Mhm.
So we're going to be talking about aliens in movies in particular, and we watched, we watched a lot of movies to prepare ourselves for this.
We did.
We watched both good and bad movies, but I'm excited to go through them. And a huge part of almost every single one of these movies is this idea of believing, or more often likely not believing, that aliens exist and have in fact come to Earth. So, what have you noticed about this trope of who we believe, what is believed, and how it plays out in these alien movies?
This is an interesting question because, as already established, we both believe abstractly that there is life in the universe elsewhere.
Yes.
How much would it take for us to believe that they'd made it here? And of course, there are movies where this is not an issue. If the aliens come in guns blazing, park their spaceship over New York City, yeah, nobody's saying, you know, are the aliens real?
Right. Absolutely.
Something you want to add to this briefing, Captain Hiller?
No, sir. I'm just a little anxious to get up there and whoop ET's ass, that's all.
But for the ones where they're kind of sneaking around and we're getting weird phenomena that we can't explain, this is a very common trope. Often, the people who first see them, first spot them, are rejected or they're not believed.
Definitely.
Similarly, as to with horror movies, there's a certain way that race and gender plays into who is believed and who isn't believed. So, over and over again in these movies that we're watching, the first people to notice that there's something wrong are children or women or people of color. And the people that they're trying to convince, more often than not, are the sort of the scientific, the rational, the white man
Right.
who does not believe in this stuff.
That is so true. In the same way we see in horror movies of people not believing that there's something off or that maybe there's something scary down in that basement, it's still this idea of someone super frustratingly being ignorant of their own situation.
Yeah, so the oldest movie we watched was the 1956 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet, bringing a new dimension in terror to the giant super scope screen.
This was based off a book and was remade several times, both directly and also in different forms, which we'll talk about later in this episode. And so the premise of the 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers is that in the small fictional town of Santa Mira, California, there's something going on. And what's going on is that people are being replaced with like alien pod versions of themselves. So they look the same, they talk the same, they dress the same, but they're not the same. The thing that's different is that they're missing human emotion because they're actually all part of this sort of alien hive mind that is coming to replace humanity on Earth. Notably, in the opening scenes of the movie, there's a child who's insisting he's running away from his mother, insisting that his mother is not his mother. And there's a woman who knows that her Uncle Ira is not right. But when she is seen by our protagonist, a doctor who is quite literally a man of science, he doesn't really believe her.
Yeah, there's some of the most straightforward and classic gaslighting going on. And yeah, we can play that quote.
Trigger warning with the gaslight.
Now, no one could possibly impersonate your Uncle Ira without you or your Aunt Alida or even me seeing a million little differences. I want you to realize that. Think about it. And then you'll know that the trouble is inside you.
He has to literally be shown and convinced by a fellow white man in order for him to take this problem that at this point should have been very obvious seriously.
And this is, like we said, it's something that's so common in these movies that it becomes its own trope. And so Another movie that we watched was from 2019. It's called The Vast of Night, and it's set in the 1950s, but it's a modern day letter to older alien movies. And so in this movie, one of the plot points is that there have been these teams of soldiers that have secretly had to do construction, different projects that relate directly to covering up evidence of aliens on Earth. And there's a character named Billy who's a soldier who's revealing this to the protagonist over a phone call. And according to Billy, it was an explicit choice that the government chose when they were choosing which soldiers to take part in this. They chose soldiers of color, so Black, Latino soldiers, to be the ones doing this work because, as he puts it, nobody will believe them.
But everyone on these details were Black or Mexican. All of us doing sweat work.
You think they did that on purpose?
I know they did.
Why?
Because who's going to listen to us?
He explicitly calls out this trope that we're talking about, is that no one will listen to them, and that made them perfect for this job because no matter what they would say, they would be ignored. So this movie, that's an homage to these older movies, these 1950s alien movies, is calling out the thing that we see play out in a very literal sense.
Mm-hmm.
Going on this idea of belief and who do we believe, there's a really interesting rural component to this as well, because rural alien movies do feel really different and have different elements than urban alien movies. So, can you tell me a bit about what some of these rural elements are to the notion of who gets believed in alien movies?
It's far more often that these movies where belief is sort of in question, they happen more often in rural settings because there's more isolation. It's more likely that
Mm.
somebody's going to be the only person out in the field when they see the weird lights in the sky. And it's just more likely that there's only going to be one person or one family or one neighborhood that is experiencing this weirdness as opposed to, a metropolis of a few million people.
This is specifically the organization that we work for, the Daily Yonder's job and focus is covering rural news, but I think that's an interesting element too, is this idea of media coverage and what gets reported on as part of belief.
Mhm.
There's this idea of what are media news outlets tuned into and reporting on, and often that's something that's happening in an urban space over a rural one, and so I think, yeah, that's a key portion of what gets believed, is how then the people who experience it get the news out to the rest of the world.
Especially when we think about just how vast the United States is and how much land there is where there isn't necessarily a lot of people around. It seems like a pretty good place to land a spaceship to me.
A city is gonna, more often they're getting destroyed in these movies. There's scenes of destruction and lasers coming down from the spaceship, and it's a little more subtle in rural alien movies. There's maybe less of hard evidence of a building is getting destroyed, but something more subtle, like something feels off. And I think that is also interesting in the small town idea, because when you know more of the people in your town, you're maybe a little more aware that something isn't quite right, that someone is acting a little strange and something's a little different. But it's this sneakier thing than a high rise building getting destroyed by aliens in the sky.
Another thing that happens when aliens arrive in rural places is that there's sort of this understanding that, generally speaking, the fact that aliens can make it to us and we don't even know about them means that they have superior technology. That contrast becomes more exaggerated when they're landing in rural communities, especially ones that have a certain look to them. So if you think about movies like Signs or movies like Nope, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all
Mhm.
feature pretty prominently a farmhouse, right? The
Yeah.
farmhouse is the place where the people live and where the aliens come to. And so they're drawing this contrast between this technology that we can't duplicate, we can't understand, we never could have come up with on our own, and a farmhouse, which is in some sense understood to be a little retro,
Yeah.
or a little old fashioned, but is at the heart of it meant to represent human communities. They're meant to be warm, they're meant to be cozy, they're meant to be sentimental in order to represent the human present.
Yeah.
It's homey agrarian farmhouse versus sleek alien spaceship. And I think that's also done intentionally affects the way that we see rural communities in those movies.
But it is so interesting how different, because what you said is so true, and it's interesting how different that is from the horror movie genre that we talked about,
Hmm.
where farmhouses weren't warm and cozy signs of humanity. They were places of terrifying horror and somewhat place you did not want to stumble upon. So it's interesting how rural is depicted so differently in these alien movies than the horror ones.
Yes, I think this is something that we're gonna come back to repeatedly, but generally, both rural people in places are much more sympathetic than they are across the horror genre. They are more often the heroes, more often the protagonists, more often the people that we're rooting for, and the people that we identify with,
Mm.
as opposed to, killer hillbillies or slashers or whoever else might be hanging out in that farmhouse that you really, really, really should not go into.
So would you say that rural people are more likely to be portrayed as those who believe in aliens in these movies?
I think that really what happens is that rural people are more likely to be in the situation where they've seen something that others haven't, and therefore they have to persuade rather than that they're inherently more willing to believe. Like there's this great line in Signs where the little boy is looking for a book about aliens in the bookshop.
Do you have any books on extraterrestrials?
Now, don't tell me you believe this horse manure.
As a matter of fact, I think we have one. Came by mistake in a shipment, decided to keep it for the city people. Last row, third book on the left, honey.
Yeah, kept it for the city people.
Right. And so in Signs, anyways, they're casting aliens as something that city people believe in. These small town people don't have time for that. They're not interested in that. But there's also, situations like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind when the people who sort of just by coincidence are the ones who've seen this spaceship are rural, but they're having a hard time convincing people in their own rural community that the spaceships are there. So I think like we said earlier, I think it has more to do with the situation that rural people are cast in alien movies than any sort of inherent susceptibility, I guess, to alien belief.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I also think that the other force that is important to acknowledge that's at play throughout all of this of belief and who's has to try to convince others and everything that's going on is the government and
Mhm.
their either direct involvement or lack of involvement, action or inaction in this whole aliens coming to Earth situation. So, how do you see the role of the government entities play out across all of these alien movies?
Yeah, I think this is something super interesting. Because the government and whether or not the government knows something that we don't know about aliens is a huge source of paranoia and conspiracy in real life, to this day.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it's something that comes up in alien movies. And I think that the way that the government is involved in urban alien movies versus rural alien movies is pretty distinctive and pretty telling. In urban movies, the government is a big focus, but it's also often government agents are more likely to be the heroes. So the most obvious example I can think of in this is Independence Day,
Oh, yeah.
which is a movie that I absolutely love,
Me too.
that I grew up watching. I mean, shamelessly, I love Independence Day.
But as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night, we will not vanish without a fight, we're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
For those who haven't seen it, giant alien spaceships come to hover over a dozen or so major cities around the world. And they sort of have these synchronized strikes where they destroy whole cities at a time, New York, LA, London, and then move on to different locations. And of course, because it's an American movie, the main force in fighting the aliens is the US government, specifically the military, and the president, who, of course, is a cutie former fighter pilot.
Yeah, he rocks.
We like him. And so, the government is front and center in combating these aliens. But that contrasts pretty distinctly with how the government acts in rural settings.
Yeah.
And even in Independence Day, I think, because we've got this heroic rah 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 go government go when they're in DC, and then they go to Area 51, which is in
Right.
the desert in Nevada. And now there's this big secret. It's a secret so big that not even the president knew about it.
Take my word for it. There's no Area 51. There's no recovered spaceship.
Excuse me, Mr. President. That's not entirely accurate.
And that, I think, is pretty representative of the way that the government interacts with rural places in these movies, which is that if they're there, it's secretive, they're up to no good. Like Vast of Night, there's this big cover up that's going on in rural places.
Yeah, and something I think about with Close Encounters of the Third Kind is when the government is deciding to evacuate people because of alien interference, they have this line where they're talking about, what would scare every Christian enough to, like, actually leave the area. They try to come up with natural disaster ideas, like anything except telling the truth of alien presence.
Wait. Contaminated water affects people, crop, animals, disease.
Yeah, epidemic.
What
Plague
kind of
epidemic.
disease? What kind of disease?
Plague epidemic.
Nobody's gonna believe in plague in this day and age.
Anthrax.
Ranching country.
Yes.
There are a lot of sheep up on those hills.
Wait a
Find
minute, that's
couple of
good. That's
infected
good. I like
lambs
that.
Would create a panic.
But it may not evacuate everybody. There's always some joker who thinks he's immune. What I need is something so scary it'll clear 300 square miles of every living Christian soul.
Yeah. And so they're either being secretive and lying to people, or they're not there at all.
Yeah.
One example of this is the movie Cowboys and Aliens, which is tragically just not very good.
I think maybe my least favorite of all that we watched, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, star-studded cast. It's got Harrison Ford, it's got Daniel Craig, it's got Olivia Wilde. Still not good. This is a movie from 2011. It's set in the West, sort of New Mexico, Arizona area, and it's set in the 1870s, and there's not a lot of government presence out there at that time. And when they're confronted with these big, mean, pretty icky aliens that are capturing people and they're taking hostages and they're, exploding these towns with technology that nobody's ever seen. I mean, these people have horses and pistols and bows and arrows
Right.
compared to the alien spaceship. So there's this question of, okay, well, do we call in the military? Do we call in the government to help us out with this? Because we're pretty blatantly outmatched. And Harrison Ford, who plays a Civil War general turned cattle rancher, basically says, no, screw those guys. They're going to mess it up.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have called in the army. I ain't gonna turn this over to no West Pointers. Gotta get on the telegraph, ask Washington which hand to wipe with. Waited around at Antietam for him to tell me what to do.
Yeah, and then in other movies like Signs, which we've mentioned before, that's the 2002 M. Night Shyamalan movie, which takes place, as it tells us on screen, in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is about 45 miles outside of Philadelphia. And so in this movie, a former priest, played by Mel Gibson, and his family come under attack from aliens that are in their cornfield, but these aliens are also invading all over the world. But in their small town, in their community, the government is not a factor, not there to help them deal with this problem. So they to take matters into their own hands and deal with it with a baseball bat and water, which they find out the aliens don't like. But they had to figure that out on their own, no help from the government.
Right. And so, like in Cowboys and Aliens, the cavalry isn't coming. This group of rural people is left to deal with this problem on their own and, fight off the threat themselves, which they do successfully, as you mentioned. This all sort of ties into this idea, and not a particularly accurate idea, but this idea of rural places as places where the government isn't really involved, or they have less reach. There's more emphasis on sort of the rugged individual and the independent individual. There's all sorts of daily underreporting we can point to show, actually how important federal government and federal agencies is in rural communities, ranging from things like wildfire preparedness to
Yeah.
land management. There's this idea that is very common in depictions of rurality in media, which is this idea that it's this no man's land where I don't know, where men are men and the
Yeah.
government isn't really around to help out. And that I think is a pretty notable feature of these movies, where, like with the government is up to no good in rural places or they're just absent altogether.
Seems like that is showcasing fears or concerns that people have about the government. Like either they're hiding something and they're lying to you, or they're not going to be there to help you. I mean, and then there's sexy fighter pilots who can save the day, but more often in the rural movies, it's this paranoia about that the government can't help, won't help, and in fact is intentionally harming you. So thinking about that paranoia idea about the government, what about the paranoia about the actual aliens?
Oh yeah, those.
They've come to Earth, and what are some of the different ways they're depicted as engaging with Earth once they get here?
I think there is a few different ways that this tends to play out. There's a classic alien invasion narrative where here they are, they're coming to get you. They look slimy and buggy and weird and green, and they're probably going to kill you. There's another genre of alien movie that we've already talked about some of these, where they're secretly embedded in society and figuring out who is the alien um, is the main feature of that movie. And so when we talk about the first type of movie, there's something that we talked about in our horror show is that there's a way that rurality is often sort of depicted as backwards in opposition to the modern shiny progress of the city. But in these movies, like we already sort of talked about, it's not backwardsness that rurality represents, it's humanness. And that is stands in opposition to the alien technology, which is scary. And so we have these invaders with their scary high tech stuff, and they come to the heartland, and we are the heartland, and we
Mm.
are represented by the heartland and all of its sort of rural wholesomeness. When we think about the more positive stereotypes of rural communities is that they're small, which means that they're tight knit, which means that people care about each other and know each other personally, and you know your mailman and you know your soccer coach and you know the mayor. And this is a community of people who are really tightly tied together. And that makes the alien sort of the ultimate outsider. Like, not only are they not from the town, they're not even from this planet. It creates this inside good, human good versus big evil outsider very scary dynamic.
And yeah, and when there's this outside presence that's from a different planet, it creates community and togetherness of people who are fighting against this, and that can sometimes be groups that you wouldn't really expect to band together, but have to find common ground and find their humanity and similarities to fight against this outside evil. Yeah, and work together, and I think that that's something we see show up in a lot of these films.
Right. So in Cowboy and Aliens, there is, obviously this historical conflict between the ranchers and the white settlers who are carrying out westward expansion and the Native American groups who have been living there. Suddenly, these two groups of people who are enemies are working together to fight the aliens.
Another great example is the movie The Faculty, which is a movie from 1998.
The students at Harrington High have always suspected their teachers were from another planet.
Is this gonna be on the test?
This is the test.
This time, they're right.
It takes the trope of a group of high schoolers who are all so different, and there's the jock and the popular kid and the nerd and the goth girl, but they have to come together to fight aliens that have taken over the bodies of their teachers. In that movie, The Faculty, it shows one of the most common trends in alien media that's been going on for decades, which is this idea of aliens are hiding among us and they're disguised as us. So this is the body snatcher phenomenon. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, we watched a bunch of these movies, and there were so many more that we didn't watch. And we already explained the 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They remade that in 1978. There is a version of that takes place on a military base. There's a version of that takes place in Iowa. There's a version of that takes place in an Arctic base. And there's also one that happens in a small English town where people are just trying to drink beer. And so the movie from 1956 is based off a book that was originally published in 1954. And it feels so deeply tied to the Cold War. And not only the Cold War, but also McCarthyism, right? And this idea that there is an enemy, communists or aliens, and they are among us. And, sort of the entire, when you think about the Red Scare, and it was this wave of paranoia sweeping the country that was based on trying to root out the internal communist threat and that your neighbors could be communists and your teachers could be communists
Yeah.
and you don't know who's safe and you don't know who could be part of this massive efforts to destroy America. Or on the flip side, you don't know who could report you for suspecting you of being a communist, right? So there's all
Right.
sorts of paranoia that's going on. That sort of get these people to people interactions, and this movie is really playing with that. When a person is replaced with a alien pod person, they look the same, they talk the same, but they lose their emotion, they lose their individuality. They're depicting collectivism or communism as this thing that kills individuals and is at odds with humanity itself
Mhm.
and capitalism also.
And you're reborn into an untroubled world.
Where everyone's the same.
Exactly.
What a world. Then you have no feelings, only the instinct to survive. You can't love or be loved, am I right?
You say it as if it were terrible. Believe me, it isn't. You've been in love before. It didn't last. It never does. Love, desire, ambition, faith. Without them, life's so simple, believe me.
I don't want any part of it.
You're forgetting something, Miles.
What's that?
You have no choice.
And this movie is really literal in addressing things. In the early parts of the movie, they talk about an idea of that there's been an epidemic mass hysteria that's caused by worrying about what's going on in the world.
What's going on?
I don't know. A strange neurosis, evidently contagious. An epidemic mass hysteria. In 2 weeks, it spread all over town.
Well, what causes it?
Worry about what's going on in the world, probably.
The difference between these aliens and the real people is their notion of humanity and the fight to remain human.
All of us, a little bit. We harden our hearts, grow callous. Only when we have to fight to stay human do we realize how precious it is to us. How dear.
One feature that I found really funny is that one of the ways that you can tell people were taken over by aliens is that they go out of business. They stop.
Yeah.
They close their businesses. So aliens and communists are both a threat to capitalism. And so, so you have this idea of who's an alien and who's not. But what's really interesting is that because this movie or this concept has been repeated so often, you get to be like in each remake there's a new fear or there's a new worry that
Mhm.
these aliens are representing. And there's a way in which that these aliens are blamed for different parts of the world's ills. So in the 1956 version, of course, what they're really talking about is communism. But then 60 years later, there's a movie made in 2013 called The World's End, and it's about this man-child who's never grown up. His name is Gary. They grew up in this town where there are 12 pubs, all within a mile, and it is his life's ambition to complete this pub crawl that goes to all 12 of these pubs. And he brings all of his friends who are sort of estranged back. They're all now these like middle-aged businessmen, etc. And they return to their hometown and discover that everyone there has been replaced by an alien. And in this movie, the aliens are responsible for the internet, basically.
They basically claim that every technological advancement that has occurred over the years since our main character has left his hometown, they did.
We are the network, and we are here for your betterment. In the last 23 years, have you not marveled as information technology has surged forward?
No.
Earth has grown smaller yet greater as connectivity has grown. This is our doing, and it is just the beginning.
This movie is about, the spread of technology and globalization, and that is the paranoia as opposed to communism. Yeah, boring, old school. But both of these movies, they have different fears and different anxieties, have the same solution, which is ultimately humanity.
Yeah, and a lot of times the concluding result of these movies is that humans are complex and defiant, and it is this emotion and irrationality and ways of defiantly acting that make the humans defeat the aliens. This dysfunction of humanity prevails and is the beautiful, messy thing that we all love.
We are the human race, and we don't like being told what to do.
Just what is it that you want to do?
We want to be free. Yeah. We want to be free to do what we want to do. Yeah. We want to get loaded. Yeah. And we want to have a good time. And that's what we're going to do.
Right, and that's what ultimately saves the day. I mean, it's what makes humanity worth saving, and it's what gives humanity the ability to save itself against this sort of collective hive mind, when whatever form it is.
And the things that, like this dysfunction, the things we see as problems in that dysfunction, sometimes you can just blame that on the aliens too. Like in The Vast of Night, the aliens are blamed for sowing conflict, and actually anything that's a problem, you could also blame that on the aliens.
I think they get inside our heads and make us do destructive things like drink and overeat. I've seen good people go bad and smart people go mad. I think at the highest level, they do things that cause nations to go to war. Things that make no sense. And I think no one knows they're being affected.
Right, I mean, misinformation, mega corporations, war, whatever, it's all the aliens' fault. We didn't do that.
And this idea of individuality and independence, I think, goes back to what you were saying earlier about the rural notion of being a person fighting on your own without the help of the government, and being your own individual person and fighting for justice in your small town or rural place.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if the thesis of these movies is going to be that individuality and humanity is important, having these rural settings and rural people acting that out, works well because of the stereotype that already exists about rural people and communities as fiercely independent and able and willing to and wanting to stand on their own, as opposed to cities, which, from this perspective, I don't think I necessarily agree with it, but from this perspective, can be painted with more of a broader brush of, oh, all of these people who look alike and go to work alike and, work for big banks or whatever.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, because I think it's my favorite moment in all of these movies that we watched. In Body Snatchers, 1956, right near the end, there's this very iconic moment where our main character basically breaks the fourth wall, looks to the camera, and yells,
They're after all of us! Our wives, our children, everyone! They're here already! You're next! You're next! You're next!
it's, a warning of this communism messaging and paranoia that we've talked about, but also I think related to this individuality and independence. It's this rural person being the voice that speaks out and warns the world, and literally is taking a moment as a strong, independent person and saying, hey, pay attention.
Yeah, and saving the day.
So I should always believe Chicken Little that the sky is falling.
The sky is falling.
What's going on?
The sky is falling! The sky is falling!
The sky is falling!
Are you crazy?
Okay, well, now that I'm thoroughly paranoid about aliens in every part of my life, I think this is a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for teaching me about paranoia and what alien movies are all about, what rural versus urban alien movies are, and I'm excited to keep diving into this with you.
Yeah, very, very happy to talk about it all, and excited to hear about what we're gonna do next.
Yeah, so next we'll keep diving into this idea of place in alien movies. So, do more of a deep dive into alien movies that take place specifically in the West and the idea of how the frontier and notions of the frontier play into alien movies.
Just remember, don't trust the government.
Don't trust the government, don't trust your neighbor, believe women.
Believe women and believe aliens.
Crop Circle Cinema is hosted and produced by Susanna Brown and Anya Patron-Slepian. This series was edited by Susanna Brown. Our executive producer is Joel Cohen. Original music was composed by Quincy Ponvert and Leo Pozell. Cover art for the series was illustrated by Nat Nichols. Special thanks to the staff at the Daily Yonder and the Rural Assembly. You've been listening to the Rural Remix podcast feed.